Okay, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to break down a concept that political scientists are talking about more and more, the authoritarian playbook. We're going to look at analysis from democracy scholars and human rights groups to really understand what it is, how it works, and, why it's being seen as such a critical warning sign for the health of any democracy.
This quote from the source material really sets the stage perfectly. It gets right to the heart of the matter. The real threat they're talking about isn't some sudden, dramatic takeover. Nope, it's something that happens right out in the open, where elected leaders start to see the very foundations of democracy, we're talking courts, laws, institutions, as just obstacles, things that can be bent or even broken if they get in the way.
So that leads us to this huge question. How does a democracy actually, slide? If you're picturing tanks rolling down Main Street, well, that's really not how it tends to happen anymore. The process today can be way, way more subtle than that.
And that's the absolute key. What the analysis we're looking at really stresses is that this is rarely a sudden collapse. It's more like a slow, steady erosion, happening piece by piece. And by looking at this process in a bunch of different countries over time, scholars have actually found a clear pattern, a playbook, if you will, of warning signs.
And there's actually a name for this process in academia: democratic backsliding. Now, the two most important words there are steady and state-led. This isn't just random chaos. It's a deliberate chipping away at the guardrails of democracy. Things like independent courts, a free press, a professional civil service. And the scariest part? It's done from the inside, by the very leaders who are elected to uphold those institutions.
Okay, so keeping that idea in mind, the analysis we're exploring today does something pretty direct. It takes these established models and applies them to recent events right here in the United States, trying to see if these pieces fit into that larger, troubling pattern. So, let's see how they do it.
All right, this is where we get to the heart of it, the authoritarian playbook itself. By studying countries where democracy is weakened, scholars have spotted 4 themes that just keep showing up again and again. These are the big signs they're always on the lookout for.
Okay, so here's the playbook in 4 steps. First, you weaken the rules of the game. Second, you delegitimize your opponents. You don't just disagree with them, you paint them as enemies of the people. Third, you start to tolerate or even encourage political violence. And fourth, you chip away at civil liberties. Now, the research says any one of these is a big problem, but when you see all 4 happening together, well, that's the blaring alarm that a democracy is in serious, serious trouble.
So what does this look like in the real world? It's one thing to talk about it in theory, but the analysis points to some very specific examples from the US to show how these themes are showing up in practice.
So one of the first things the analysis points to is the language being used. We're talking about militarized rhetoric in domestic politics. When leaders start describing their own cities as war zones or their political rivals as internal enemies, that's a huge red flag. According to the research, this is a classic authoritarian tactic because it reframes political debate as a life or death battle, which then justifies using extreme measures.
Now, this slide is really interesting because it shows what analysts call a 2-tiered system of justice. The source points to things like aggressive immigration policies and court decisions that, in effect, create 2 different classes of people. You have one group that gets the full protection of the Constitution, and then you have another that faces intimidation and fewer protections. This kind of erosion of equal justice is seen as a major sign of democratic backsliding.
And this slide really gets at the direct attacks on those democratic guardrails we were talking about. The analysis highlights things like openly attacking judges who make unfavorable rulings, using procedural tricks at the Supreme Court, and basically gutting independent watchdog agencies. According to this view, the goal here is pretty clear: remove any and all institutional checks on executive power.
The analysis then shifts from looking at individual actions to a whole, detailed, written plan. It's called Project 2025, and it's a massive blueprint put together by conservative think tanks for a potential new administration. And just look at that number, over 900 pages. That alone tells you just how massive the scale of the proposed changes are.
So what's inside this massive document? Well, according to the analysis, here are some of the big goals. It calls for a plan to fire tens of thousands of nonpartisan, career civil servants and replace them with people loyal to the president's ideology. It also aims to bring independent agencies, like the Federal Reserve, under direct White House control. And it proposes using the U.S. military for domestic law enforcement.
So what do the experts make of all this? Well, according to the source, a lot of scholars who study authoritarianism are using some pretty stark language to describe it. They see it as a roadmap to what they call an electoral autocracy. That's a system where, sure, you still have elections, but the whole system is tilted so much that the people in power can't really lose.
Okay, so if that's the playbook, what about the defense? What pushes back? The analysis also digs into the institutional checks and balances that still exist inside the system. What are the democratic guardrails that are still standing?
And on this, the source is crystal clear. With so many concerns centered on the executive branch, the most powerful institutional check available right now is the legislative branch. It's Congress. And Congress has some serious tools in its toolbox here. It has the power to block the use of the military on American soil. It can pass new laws to protect things like voting rights. It can launch investigations into any abuse of power. And, maybe most importantly, it controls the money. It can simply refuse to fund any projects it sees as authoritarian.
And this is where it all becomes very real, very concrete. The analysis positions the upcoming 2026 midterm elections as much more than just another political horse race. It's framed as a direct, practical test of our system. Will these congressional guardrails actually hold up, or will they buckle?
And so, in the end, it all boils down to the question the source leaves us with. It frames the choice not as one between political parties, but about the fundamental kind of country we want to live in. Is it one where laws apply to everyone, even the powerful, and where institutions like courts and the press can still act as a check? Or is it one where a single leader gets to decide who is a real American and which laws apply to which people? It's a heavy question, and one worth thinking about.